welcome to Stingray Tom's Florida and another dip into the archive. About 6 months ago, I found this art catalog in a used bookstore. While I don't normally buy something like this, it was obviously different from others I've seen. It was created for a 1977 show of Florida paintings of Winslow Homer, still today one of America's most successful and important artists who illustrated both the country's natural beauty and the lives of its people. After I bought it, I scanned and cataloged it and then filed it away in the archive as well as in my mind. Then, a few weeks ago, in another bookstore, I ran across a similar catalog. At first, I thought it was from the same exhibition, but I bought it anyway. It was similar, but it was from an unrelated exhibit presented nearly a decade earlier. It seemed to me that the two catalogs were suggesting I should use them to make a video. I've done several videos on specific books in the past, since they should be seen by a wider audience. This one on the keys, for instance. So this video is about Winslow Homer, his trips to Florida between 1884 and 1909, and the artwork he made while on vacation. I'll let others do a general biography of Homer, and I'll leave any real discussion of his art to other experts. What I'll cover is the Florida paintings he did, nearly all watercolors, as well as a few from the Bahamas, Cuba, and Bermuda, since they were also in the exhibitions. He did about 42 paintings in Florida, and there's more than 50 in the two books. Most are in black and white, with only a few faded color plates in one of them. I'll show the monochrome prints from the books, and then transition to the original artwork, which is generally available on the internet. There's quite a lot of detail in the paintings, and what struck me from going from monochrome to color is just how many invisible details appear when seeing Homer's originals. Homer's later life, including the many trips he made to Florida, was during the time of the Gilded Age. You can check out this video about the development of Florida's tourism for more information, but ever so briefly, let's cover the Gilded Age. In the US, it ran from the 1870s through the 90s, though in Florida, I put it ending about a decade later. Things always developed later on the frontier. The Gilded Age is notable for the extreme wealth of the upper class and the extreme poverty of the poor, especially in the South, due to the aftermath of the Civil War, especially the failure of Reconstruction and the establishment of Jim Crow rule. The Gilded Age is also the term I use for Florida's first major tourism era. While Florida has been getting tourists as early as the 1820s, just after it became a U.S. territory, it wasn't until the 1880s when Florida's organized tourism really took off. This happened in large part because of the work of Florida's two Henrys, Flagler and Plant. It was they who brought the Gilded Age to Florida. The two Henrys established modern railroads along the east coast of Florida and across the state to Tampa Bay. They built grand resorts in St. Augustine, Tampa, Palm Beach, and Miami Beach, and many attractions were developed for the ultra-rich, who'd spend their winters being attended by staff and servants, providing some work for some of the state's formerly enslaved residents. I came up with the title, The Florida Artwork of Winslow Homer on the Edge of the Gilded Age. Homer's visits between 1884 and 1909 fit into the Gilded Age of tourism, though he avoided much of the stuff designed for the likes of the ultra-rich, hence being on the edge. Instead of staying in places such as St. Augustine's Hotel Ponce de Leon and attending the never-ending winter balls, symposiums, and concerts, Homer visited less developed places including Key West, Enterprise, and Homosassa. While his paintings were popular with the wealthy, he didn't visit Florida to schmooze with America's elite families. There's a few things I'll mention at this point. The images of paintings I've gathered from the internet varied greatly in brightness, shadows, saturation, and discoloration. So I adjusted them to make them more uniform and viewable. I was hesitant to do that, but I don't think I'm misrepresenting Homer. It's Homer's trees, wildlife, boats, and people that are important, not that the paintings look exactly as they did when new. Feel free to comment on my efforts below. I'd love to hear what you think. By the way, I was able to find reproductions of all the paintings except for some that are in private hands or are owned by the US government. That's part of why I'm not a big fan of private ownership of artwork. There's a total of 53 different paintings, but I've kept 9 duplicates for completeness sake. So one last thing. We know of Homer's activities in Florida from letters he wrote to family and friends. That's where we have some clues as to how he traveled to and around Florida. Back then, there were 2 ways to travel long distances. Since trains are still relatively common in 2026, that's probably the mode of travel most people think about, especially since I've already mentioned the 2 Henrys and their railway empires. But as important as steam trains were in the 19th century, there was another steam-powered mode that was extremely important. But as important as steam trains were in the 19th century, there was another steam-powered mode that was extremely important for travel to Florida and around it: steamships and steamboats. That's a topic I plan to cover soon since it's such an important aspect of Florida tourism from the early 1800s until air travel became popular and cost-effective. Looking at the impact of Flagler's Florida East Coast Railway and the plant system, note that both are just for travel within Florida, while if you look at the Clyde line, it covers both the state and transportation along the Atlantic coast all the way to Boston, Massachusetts. Of course, many people vacationing in Florida used trains to get to the ports, but people taking a train to go to Florida had to change trains and railway companies more than once, including in Jacksonville, Tallahassee, or wherever in the state. Meanwhile, the Clyde line, the largest steamship line along the Atlantic coast, had weekly scheduled service from Boston south to Jacksonville, with direct connections to Key West and even Tampa. The other aspect is that because Florida has a massive coastline, and even today the vast majority of Floridians live within 20 miles of the coast, back in the 19th century that was as high as 95% of residents. And then there's the St. Johns River. Sometimes called America's Nile in the Clyde Line promotional materials, it was a major route into the state's interior. I did a 5-video series on the St. Johns a couple years ago because of its importance. When you think about it, the St. Johns can be compared with the Hudson River in New York in its navigable length. Maybe that's not a big deal today, but 100 or more years ago it certainly was. Both passenger and freight steamboats traveled from Jacksonville and hence the Atlantic Ocean, all the way to Lake Monroe and the towns of Sanford and Enterprise. Along with Palatka and DeLand, they became the ports of entry for much of the interior of Central Florida, providing an easy and reliable path for tourists to explore the wilderness. While I haven't explored all of Winslow Homer's letters, I can make some pretty good educated guesses as to how he traveled to and around Florida. His first trip to Florida in 1884 was the year after he had moved to his family's estate in Prouts Neck, Maine. That's not terribly important for this video, but this painting in one of the exhibits was painted there. I mention it because it helps inform us that he likely traveled by steamship from Boston to Florida. It also seems likely that he used steamships and boats to get around the state. Homer also visited Bermuda, the Bahamas, and Cuba by ship. As the video progresses, I'll briefly mention his likely transportation choices as he visited various parts of the state over 25 years. But I won't say much more. It's known that Homer once said, "I regret very much that I have painted a picture that requires any description." While it's just my opinion, I'd argue that none of these paintings require any explanation at all. As far as we know, Homer didn't create paintings during every documented trip. He also didn't visit Florida every year, though many of the visits spanned a few months. For example, December 1903 through January 1904, and then December 1904 to January 1905. These two exhibitions contain paintings from 10 years. I've organized the paintings chronologically simply because I couldn't think of a better way to do it. By 1884, Homer was a mature artist, and at least to my untrained eye, his technique didn't change, so chronologically it is. What follows is 56 of Winslow Homer's paintings done in or near Florida. His first trip, which resulted in paintings, included visits to the Bahamas and Cuba. While no Florida paintings are dated 1885, he probably started his vacation here, taking a steamship from Boston to Jacksonville and on to the Bahamas and Cuba. The next year, it appears that Homer left Maine, taking a steamship all the way to Key West. From there, he headed by ship north to Tampa, and at some point we know that he visited the Everglades, also by boat. 3 years later, he returned to the Bahamas and also took a steamboat along the St. Johns River, where he ran across some of the best freshwater fishing. In 1890, he returned to the St. Johns. While in 1889 we're not sure how far he traveled, this time he took a boat all the way to the end of its navigable length, to Lake Monroe. He appears to have stayed in Enterprise, on the north side of the lake. Paintings from this trip, including at least one from Blue Spring, near to Enterprise. If he was lucky enough to visit the site on a cool day, he'd have seen over 100 manatees, which use the constant temperature of the spring outflow to stay warm. The 1977 exhibition showed this study for a painting he completed later on in his studio. The painting, titled The Gulf Stream, is one of the most famous and most dramatic paintings, long considered one of his greatest. It can be thought to be a remarkable study of survival in the midst of hopelessness, though some critics consider it to be rather melodramatic. The next paintings in the exhibitions are from Homer's 1899 trip. He takes another steamship to Florida and heads down the St. Johns to Enterprise once again. He also fit another visit to the Bahamas in this winter. Rather obviously using yet another steamship, in 1900 he visited Bermuda out in the Atlantic. Late 1903 saw Homer steaming to both Key West and north to Tampa, finally reaching Homosassa, a small town north of Tampa Bay that had an emergent fishing community. Years later, the origin of the Homosassa River, a powerful set of springs, became home to one of the more popular attractions in the state, named Not surprisingly, Homosassa Springs. It appears that Homer was happy in Homosassa because he returned for both the 1904 and 1905 winter seasons, both times likely arriving from Key West. By this time, there was a direct rail line that he could take from Jacksonville across the state, but like much of his many trips to Florida, it's likely he traveled almost entirely by water. I hope this was an enjoyable and informative look at Florida in the late 1800s. I suppose it didn't have a large amount of history in it, but I thought it'd be interesting to take a look at how one of America's most important artists saw the state while he vacationed here. Winslow Homer's art is undeniably wonderful, and the way he could capture the beautiful nature of Florida is truly remarkable. Thanks for watching another of my videos. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Both of those help the channel grow. Also, check out my Patreon site if you're interested in supporting my work with cold hard cash. I'd appreciate it. Stingray Tom's Florida, traveling through time around the Sunshine State.